this because of her book, The Interior Castle. These days, I think she is better known as the teacher and guide of St. John of the Cross, whose Dark Night of the Soul is, there's a Lorena McKennitt song based on it. It's almost become a cliche in pop mysticism. And it tends to refer to, geez, I had a bad week. It was a dark night. When somebody has actually gone through the dark night, it's something very different. Teresa of Avila had this vision of the soul as a castle made of a single diamond-like crystal. I don't think a devout Carmelite nun would have dreamed this up on her own. It's just a little too far outside of the dogmas and the books of prayer that they had been using. The single diamond-like crystal had many rooms in it, though she refers to them as mansions after the line from the Gospels, "In my Father's house there are many mansions." God occupies these, to put it simply, and the aspirant she wrote primarily for the fellow Carmelite nuns. There are not a lot of Christian mystics writing from the female side. There's Julian of Norwich, and I mentioned Hildegard von Bingen, and there are probably others who are slipping out of my head at the moment. St. Teresa seems to be the one who has retained an audience through the centuries. God occupies these mansions, and the aspirant enters the mansions through prayer and an ascent to the central mystery. Prayer is one of these things that's a difficult word, because it's come to mean, God, I need a boost in my salary, please. And could you make it next month? Prayer, in her sense, was an emptying of self and a reaching out to the highest that her mind could allow in. The central mystery, as she refers to it. This leads to a mystical wedding between soul and Savior. Now, the process in the book is fairly lengthy, but it's not difficult to read. Most of the translations still have a rather antiquated English. The translators are a bit reluctant to update the syntax. And you get a bit sick of her apologizing endlessly. I should hardly be so presumptuous as to write these words for you, but I am trusting that with our Lord's grace you will be guided to a further closeness to the Savior, blah, blah, blah. She goes on and on and on about that for 3 sentences, that ramble, and then you get finally the nugget that she's getting to. Each of us possesses a soul, but we do not realize its value as made in the image of God, she says. Therefore, we fail to understand the important secrets it contains. Now, there are 7 primary mansions of this interior castle. I didn't want to get too picky about it because, A, I had 2 weeks before I came here to do it, and a lot of other things, I couldn't give it a sufficient study time. But certainly the first 4, 5, or 6 seem related very much to the initiatory process we have in Hermetic orders, going through step by step. Right from the neophyte stage through the 4 elemental Sephiroth, there's that in-between grade of the portal, and finally there's the union with the divine in the 7th, which would be the initiation of Tefereth, if you're using the Hermetic Tree of Life. I've got a feeling the Golden Dawn were not unaware of this text when they were compiling their system, or whoever compiled the cipher manuscripts that they based the system on. They read this, they thought, here's some cool stuff, it seems about right. At the very least, there was some indirect influence here from someone who tried following the system. She saw the ascent of the soul happening in 4 stages. Mental prayer, turning your mind toward the divine, and withdrawal of attention from the material world is the first one. You have to actually start attuning yourself to the divine, quit the material and see the spiritual, as it says in some of the rituals, before you can get anywhere. There has to be an intention to go there. Then there is the prayer of quiet, when the attention becomes fixed on the divine. That would be, for most people, a very long process. Attitudinally, all of this stuff is a lot easier when you're older and you've been through the mill of your own existence. In terms of energy and fire of aspiration, it's a lot easier to do when you're young. There's no perfect age to do this stuff. But the Carmelite tradition is that you really can't get true, deep initiation out of this unless it comes to you before your late 20s. I assume there's some published information on this. I only got this from a documentary I saw on the Carmelites a while ago, where somebody was actually doing one of these, they can stick the electrodes on your brain, trying to see what was happening with the nuns. And those who had had this deeper initiation, yeah, you were actually getting, which are the brain waves that are the slow ones? Anyone remember? Is it theta waves? That there's alpha and beta and theta. Which? Sleep, but you find that when you trace the general brain waves, there is one that is kind of like a baseline. And they started this with Zen masters in the 60s and 70s, seeing if these guys were different. And when a Zen master went into Zazen, it was like, whoa, look at the brain patterns. It's like, he should be dead, but he isn't. It stopped mental activity. Something similar was happening with the Carmelite nuns who were checked in Italy 2 or 3 years ago. They were able to enter into a state where the mind was made still, the mind was inwardly silent, and they were locked in an absorption in their concept of the divine. The next stage, devotion of union, is actually ecstatic. And only imagination and memory can still function, that is, exist and follow their own trains of thought. There is no intellectual activity happening here. You can't analyze it. Memories will float up. The imagination will drift according to the impulses passing through the mind. Lastly, the completion of all of this, devotion of ecstasy or rapture. This is total absorption from which the suppliant emerges in tears. Now, I suspect that was kind of a cultural input to Christian nuns in medieval Spain, or post-medieval Spain. You were meant to cry over the Saviour's sufferings. That was simply the response that came out. The main thing is there's an opening of the heart center here. There is an opening beyond any mental categorization, analysis, criticism, or any of that head stuff. It's just pure emotion coming out in an ecstatic love for the divine. Teresa said, contemplative or mental prayer, in my opinion, is nothing else than a close sharing between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with Him who we know loves us. She was not anti-intellectual. She notes, I do not know whether I have put this clearly. Self-knowledge is of such consequence that I would not have you careless of it, though you may be lifted to heaven in prayer, because while on earth nothing is more needful than humility. Therefore I repeat, not only a good way, but the best of all ways, is to endeavor to enter first by the room where humility is practiced, which is far better than at once rushing on to the others. Now, I see a slight problem with that, because humility is not something you can do. Humility is a state you're in. Alan Watts, if anyone remembers him, one of the quasi-Zen, quasi-Taoist gurus of the 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, used to say this. Humility is such a funny thing. When you think you finally got it, you know you've lost it again. They had to do this self-denial routine. It was a discipline. Instead of, the yogic discipline is, okay, I will concentrate on my breathing, I will pull my mind back every time I lose my attention, I will simply stay focused on the tip of my nose or my breath or whatever it is I'm working on. There you had to keep on trying to devour your own self-attention. It became habitual. You could cry to order, and if you were able to do that, you might actually make the breakthrough. I think the tears would dry up after a time. You simply reached a point where I keep thinking of the Greek word apatheia, which is not the same thing as apathy. It's simply a state where you've gone beyond emotional affect. You can simply go blank, you can simply go still. And at that point, it's possible that the divine power is going to enter into you. This parallel I mentioned earlier with the Hermetic system of grades is touched on by this quote. You must notice that the light which comes from the king's palace hardly shines at all in these first mansions. Although not as gloomy and black as the soul in mortal sin, yet they are in semi-darkness, and their inhabitants see scarcely anything. I cannot explain myself. I do not mean this is the fault of the mansions themselves, but that the number of snakes, vipers, and venomous reptiles from outside the castle prevents souls entering them from seeing the light. They resemble a person entering a chamber full of brilliant sunshine, with eyes clogged and half closed with dust. The experience hasn't changed, the language of description is the thing that has shifted. I keep repeating this, I probably don't need to at this point. The final stage for the people who've made it through to the seventh mansion, this temple of God, this mansion of his where he and the soul rejoice in each other alone in profound silence. The mind need not act nor search for anything, as the Lord who created it wishes it to be at rest, and only to watch through a little chink what passes within. Though at times it cannot see this, yet such intervals are very short. I believe because, this is rather odd syntax. Though at times it cannot see this, yet such intervals are very short, I believe because the powers are not here lost, but only cease to work, being as it were dazed with astonishment. The other thing with any kind of mysticism, mystical endeavor, magical endeavor, is you're trying to go beyond your own ability to do anything. It's as if you're hitting yourself over the head with a hammer until you become unconscious, except that you're hoping that what you attain to is actually going to fill you with understanding and peace. I understand here what she's saying, I think. The powers are not lost here, but are here not lost, but only cease to work, being as it were dazed with astonishment. The mind is numbed, the mind is overwhelmed. And that is the thing to strive for. The astonishment takes over the entire self, and the mundane personality is, at least for a time, obliterated.